is unfortunately sick. No worries, no COVID, but that's why we are taking over. We're also delighted to have Danny Scherling of the European Commission with us. European Commission, very important, not only from the institution itself, but of course also because they are funding our project here to implement this document that you have received in a number of languages, our action guide on formaldehyde, which is the result of more than 10 years of work coming from our previous project when we had the RefWood project on reducing the formaldehyde exposure in the woodworking industries. We are now really a very far advanced step further in practice, taking care tremendously of this organization. So this, we think now today is a great opportunity because we have a very professional trainer who is going to explain the whole concept of the action guide from A to Z. Before going on into the substance, I would like to thank two people who are totally invisible, but who are making all of this work, and that are Anne and Frank of EFBWW. They are the people who are making the techniques work, and you know very well, the people who are doing the most things are often invisible. So thanks very much to them. They will make sure that this is run very professionally and that also all the translations will work. With that, I would like to hand over to Rolf for some practical information and of course also for his short introduction statement. I wish you all a very successful workshop today, and the chat function is to ask us any questions and we will try to cover them all. But again, we are 182 people already. If everybody of you is asking 5 questions, then we are going to struggle to answer them all. So welcome to all of you, and let's have a great workshop together today.
Yes, good morning to everyone, also from my side, and on behalf of the European Federation of Building and Woodworkers. I'm not going to repeat what Chris already said, but I think it is remarkable, and we should keep that also in mind for the future. Today we have a meeting with more than 200 people from one sector, which is not like the automotive sector employing millions of people in Europe, but a remarkably slower number. And 200 participants, that means this today event will have an impact in the sector. And it is, as said by Chris, not a one-day action. It is a result of a long-lasting cooperation with the previous project. And it is also a sign for the future, because the agreement we have now signed, and I have to mention that here, is for the European Federation of Building and Woodworkers, the very first agreement on European level in one of his sectors, or the sectors we are representing. The practical things, we will run an online meeting, which has some advantages, because if we would have a physical meeting, I think we would not have been 200 participants, but less. That is the advantage. Another advantage is that it is relatively silent around you. You are focused. But on the other hand, we also miss some of very important aspects of physical meetings. We can't chat with each other. We cannot network. We have no joint breaks. And that are a number of disadvantages. We will manage that. And I hope the today meeting is not only fruitful in the sense that we send messages and inform, but that we also have some sessions where we can have a bit of a discussion. How to arrange this discussion? Chris already mentioned that we like to ask you to use the chat function. It's quite clear that with 200 participants and a discussion session of half an hour, not everyone can raise questions. So be careful with raising questions. Check a bit the chat. If you see a question which is close to yours or maybe the same, then just leave it. Chris and I was expected also to check the chat function, and then we will communicate with those who are expected to answer the question. Probably mainly Gundula, but not only. We have a lot of experts here. All of you are experts in a sense on various levels and with different focus, but we all are experts, and therefore after Gundula's presentation and after the break, we will have a kind of discussion with each other. The language function you have already found in the bar below. You have this interpretation icon, and there you can choose your language. Last point from my side is the break regime. We will have at least 2 breaks, and that allows us to do the necessary things, preparing a cup of coffee or providing ourselves with water or an apple or whatever. So also from my side, again, very warm welcome, and I'm sure we will have an extremely interesting and successful meeting today. I hand now over again to Danny Skerling, not again, but to Danny Skerling. Danny Skerling is, he can introduce himself, of course, better than I can, but I have to say Danny Skerling is also very important for our joint activities, for our collaboration, because he is responsible in the European Commission for the social dialogues for the furniture sector and all the woodworking sectors. And he is one of the facilitators of our activities and cooperation on the European level. Very warm welcome to you, Danny, and the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Rolf, and good morning to everybody. Also special good morning to Chris and Rolf. Rolf, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation to this seminar. Usually the Commission people are invited to the final conference of a project, and then we see what has happened, what has been produced. But I think it is, for me personally, it's very interesting to be here today in this seminar, which is happening somewhere in the middle of the project. So it's good to see what is happening, to be part of the action, so to say. And I must say that I'm really impressed by the number of participants that you managed to have for this seminar. So Rolf, you briefly introduced who I am, but let me perhaps explain a bit more what I'm doing in the European Commission. So I work for Unit A2 of DG Employment, and A2 is the social dialogue unit, the social dialogue service. So we provide assistance to social partners in having their social dialogue meetings. So under normal circumstances, it meaning that we provide them with a meeting room with interpretation, but of course, due to the COVID crisis, these days we offer them a platform like the one you're using today. We have 43 sectoral social dialogue committees, and woodworking and furniture, they are one of those 43 committees. We also deal with so-called cross-industry social dialogues, meaning that then we are talking about really the big and quite well-known organizations like the ETUC, so the European Trade Union Confederation, and Business Europe, and they deal with more horizontal subjects, cross-cutting subjects, which cover more than one sector. And an important part of our activities also consists in funding, project funding. Each year we fund about around 80 projects. So dealing with social dialogue or with capacity building of trade unions, or also research into industrial relations. This project is actually one of the projects that we are funding. We are funding it still because it's still ongoing. That is what my unit does. And for clarity's sake, I would also like to say that regarding the subject of what we are discussing today, there is another unit of DG Employment responsible. That is Unit B3, Health and Safety. They are based in Luxembourg, and actually The subject of today, the formaldehyde, is actually falls under their remit. They prepared the directive that we are actually discussing today. So now talking about formaldehyde, this has been an agenda point for many years already on the committees, woodworking and furniture. Woodworking and furniture, they have a joint working group on occupational safety and health, or OSH as we like to call it in the commission. So, and that formaldehyde was on the agenda of that working group for quite some years already. Actually, I started in this job in 2012, and already in one of the first meetings, the issue of formaldehyde was mentioned. The discussions on the idea of a project on formaldehyde were quite proactive, because don't forget that the first version of the guide was already signed 2 years ago, so in 2018 in Lisbon. And what is for me special about this guide is that it is presented as an autonomous agreement between two European level organizations that are involved in social dialogue. Because most outputs of social dialogue discussions, they actually are joint statements, joint positions, which means that they contain sorry, a request to the Commission or to national authorities to address an issue that deals with the sector, or a request to take into account a sector's concern about an existing or an upcoming policy initiative. For instance, these days, of course, we have quite some joint positions about the impact of COVID-19 on a certain sector. But what makes this output, this guide, what makes it special is that it is an autonomous agreement. And this is a step further than a joint position, because in an autonomous agreement, social partners, they create a kind of framework at EU level, very important, at EU level, that contains an obligation. It obliges their affiliated national organizations to implement the agreement, be it in accordance with national situations, so to say, with national procedures and practices. And this is important, not only because it includes an obligation, but it also really creates a link between a result of an sectoral social dialogue at EU level, between those discussions and the national social partners. So really, it shows that what is happening in Brussels also has an impact at national level in the context of social dialogue. Because far too often there is this idea that what happens in Brussels in the social dialogue committees is really only done for the sake of European policy. In other words, the discussions in the sectoral social dialogue committees would only focus on EU policies, or would only have as objective to transmit the sector's concern to the Commission or to other EU institutions. And that is a misunderstanding. Yeah? So that what happens in Brussels is not linked to the national level, or merely linked to the national level. Well, this autonomous agreement, this guide which we are discussing here today, but this proves the contrary, yeah? Because it is based on input from national affiliates, and it should be implemented at national level. So there is a clear link, and there is certainly added value for EU social dialogue. To conclude, because I don't want you to run out of time because of me, I like to say that there is an important task for the trainers in the context of this project, the trainers attending this seminar, because the success of the implementation will, of course, largely depend on their efforts. So today is very important for the impact of the project and for the impact of the guide on the implementation of the formaldehyde limit values. So I wish you all an interesting and successful seminar, and to the project partners, Chris and Rolf a successful continuation of this quite important project. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny, for your very kind words about our project and the status of our agreement. Very much appreciated. Our next speaker should be Jonathan Croisier of Cefic Formacare, but I'm not sure if he's already in. Jonathan, are you here? If not, then that's of course a little pity. Please mute yourself. Please mute yourself. So Formacare is the European Federation of the Formaldehyde producers and resin producers. And we had invited Mr. Croisier to explain you a little bit background information about formaldehyde. Now, I'm sure you all know what is formaldehyde and what are formaldehyde-based resins. And I'm sure you also know that a world without formaldehyde is impossible. It's simply impossible. If we want to have this room empty of formaldehyde, then the first thing we need to do is Rolf and me to leave the room. And you all know that we cannot produce formaldehyde-free wood panels because wood emits formaldehyde. So we have to be realistic, and that's why we have this action guide. So I think we shouldn't bother you more about what is formaldehyde. And it's regretful that Mr. Croisier is not here. But then again, on the other side, that gives us the opportunity to gain a little bit of time and move on in the program. Rolf, may I invite you to give a little bit of the background on the action guide and its philosophy? Rolf, please.
Yes, thank you, Chris. For doing that, I will share with you one slide to just point which aspects I'm talking about. So, where is the start? Should be somewhere here, huh? This one, yes. So I hope all of you can see this little slide is the action guide is in focus, and then a few aspects. So I would start with the history. We already talked about it, and Danny also underlined that we have a long-lasting, we can say, tradition to talk about formaldehyde, its problems in the application in the panel industry, and possible health effects and other things. We had this previous project where we already worked out a guidance for technical improvements in the production lines. And that was a bit the basis for this ongoing discussion. And the result now is an agreement, an action guide in the form of a voluntary agreement. The structure of this agreement is a bit like a collective agreement. So in the beginning, we describe a scope of this guidance for whom it is relevant in terms of technical aspects, personal aspects, and so on. And then we also describe in this voluntary agreement how to organize the prevention structure. In this sense, we refer a bit to the European framework, Directive on Occupational Safety and Health in Companies. And we repeat something which is written there. One could say, why do you repeat that? There is one simple reason for that. You have general provisions which are not always practiced in all our life. And here we just combine these principles with a specific topic, namely the reduction of formaldehyde emissions in the production process of panels. So that's a simple reason. And in this respect, we repeat, for example, the so-called STOP principle. And we also repeat how a risk assessment and risk reduction process has to be designed. That is described in our agreement. So, and then we put specific emphasis on the question of participation. In a more general sense, we think that today, in all production processes, industrial processes, but also in other work situations and where people cooperate with each other, the differentiation of knowledge is very much developed. And that means a single person is not in a position to answer all questions regarding one process. You have to mobilize different levels of knowledge. And the same is on company level. Each worker in its specific position has some knowledge which can be useful for the discussion of prevention activities. So therefore, we make a distinction in our agreement between the participation within the OSH committee. We have, at least in bigger plants, then on a second level, workers' representatives, but also on a third level, then the direct participation of workers. So we are convinced that we need to mobilize people, their knowledge, their engagement of all the three levels. And then another aspect is training. So training is not just to provide a person with specific knowledge or skills. Training is also the first step to get awareness and to get people engaged. The training is sought, of course, to give specific knowledge for these technical processes, but also to provide, let's say, a level playing field, not a level playing field, but a field where people can exchange. Last point, but I think that will be also in Chris' introduction in a few minutes' time, is reporting. For us, this point of reporting is of very high importance, and it is extremely interesting, this concept we have developed, because it is not usual, it is not common that for a specific sector you have an exchange, because our reporting concept is also a kind of exchange. We gain information from company level with good examples, maybe failures, on data of exposure and so on. That gives us a picture about the overall situation, but also allows us to compare and to define best practices. So it is not only reporting to gain data and to know, it is also a tool for the future to improve. So in this sense, I think our action guide has a lot of new elements, which are, by the way, also interesting maybe for other sectors and other industries, but is a huge step forward for cooperation, better prevention at the workplace, but also the reputation of our sector in the society, and gives a very good impression to people if they are aware of that. So that was my little introduction about the background and some aspects of the agreement. And now I hand over again to Chris to continue the presentation of our action guide.
Yes, Rolf, thank you very much. I think the real presentation of the action guide will be done by Gundula. But to really stress the background of why are we all doing this? Of course, you are all very much aware of the possible health risks of formaldehyde. It's classified as a carcinogen. It's in the annex of the EU Carcinogens and Mutagens Directive, and that will be reinforced in the middle of next year. You all know that requirement number one of that directive is to substitute the carcinogen, but as we already discussed, substituting formaldehyde completely is impossible, so we have to live with it. And in the CMD annex that comes into force, there is the binding occupational exposure limit that by law throughout the whole of the EU will be enforced for companies to comply with it. We know that the way of implementing the occupational exposure limit varies widely across Europe. Some countries are much more strict than other countries. But the main concept of this action guide is to be something that is pragmatic, that is practical, and that is a management system. And that is something we think is important because you all know from your experience that generally speaking, occupational exposure is measured with a portable system. A worker is walking through, or an inspector is walking through the facility for a couple of hours, usually for 2 to 4 hours. You know it better than me. And if you have an unexpected result, it's extremely difficult to find out why that is, because you don't know exactly what that person did, where that person was, how is it possible that that person has an unexpected result. And through that, basically, like the Italians say, we're a little bit in a casino. And we are all big companies, you're all very professional people, you have a big responsibility towards your company and towards your workers, so you don't want to be in a casino. It's preferable to have a management system. And the management system, as Gundula will explain you in much more detail, that is embedded in this action guide, is basically focusing on prevention as much as possible by looking at mapping out the plant and through static measurements, finding out where could you possibly have a high formaldehyde concentration, which is not necessarily an exposure to a worker, but it could be. And through that, mapping out the plant and identifying where are the possible risk areas, and then doing 2 steps. The first step, collectively, everybody in the plant trying to reduce those areas through technical measures, innovative measures, so that the places where potentially there could be a high exposure are limited to a minimum. With ideally very small to no investments, with logistical reasons, whatever possible. That's exchange of best practices that we're looking for. And the second part then is to educate everybody in the plant that somebody who has no specific job description to go into those areas where you could potentially have a high exposure, that they should stay out of there. That everybody is entitled to be in the green area of the plant, and that's it. And only a very limited number of workers have a potential to go into those areas where you could have a higher exposure. And then that means that A, they know very well what they are doing, and B, they always should have their personal protective equipment, their mask with them, so that at the moment when they need to do an intervention, they don't need to first walk away for 10, 15 minutes to go to an office to find a mask and then to come back. No, they have it with them. They can immediately put it on and go there. But secondly, also in those areas where you are in between the 0.3 and the 0.6, that if you stay there for longer than 15 minutes, you have to put on your mask. But even if you stay just a couple of minutes, if the worker, for whatever reason, feels uncomfortable or wants to be protective of himself, this person can just put on the mask because he has the mask, he or she has the mask with them already. And through that, this really facilitates the prevention and being careful with responsibility of everybody, not just of the shift supervisors and the managers, but also that the people know perfectly what they are doing. And then through this process of implementing this action guide, what we, of course, here through this project will want to promote is social dialogue, a better and improving cooperation at plant level to responsibilize everybody to contribute for the best of the plant and for the best of the whole industry as such. And complying and showing how good we are is extremely important, because you all know that regulators, they could just continue to regulate and they want to make everything stricter and stricter. So in France, we have regulators who are considering to put formaldehyde forward for the candidate list of substances of very high concern. That would really be a big problem for us. So we absolutely have to avoid that they do that. And then there are other people who are thinking that the OAL should be lowered. The risk assessment committee has changed the reference level. We should all go lower than the 0.3, but you know much better than me how complicated it would be to go lower. So our best chance of staying in the practical field is to really show and demonstrate all together of us how successful we are. And our concept is different from the chemical industry. The chemical industry does a lot of measurements, and then they put it in a big database, and then they make a big report, thousands of measurements. That's how good we are. We know that in our industry, this is not so easy, and it's a little bit of this casino that I mentioned before. So our concept of reporting is different. Our prime focus is not to gather plenty of measurements of all of the companies and put them all together, because I don't want to spend my life to analyze statistics. And before you can make conclusions of statistics, you need so much data, you can't make progress. So what we are focusing on is to try and get from you information about how big is the possible area in your company and how fast do you manage to reduce that, how many people are informed about this action guide, how many people are working with this action guide, so that through that, we're a sector of 100,000 employees. Not all of those work in the plants, of course, but we have so many people, we can very easily generate big data with which we can convince the authorities how responsible we are here and that we have a management system in place that works. It's not just something like typically here with us in Belgium, you put something in the law and then everybody forgets about it until there is an inspector who makes a measurement. You don't know how he did it, but you have a bad result and then you're in trouble. No, we want to have a management system so that even if you are confronted in an inspection by a surprising result, you have a large database and a big explanation. And also when they start asking questions to your workers, everybody is so much involved that everybody will be convinced. So this is the concept. This is why we as EPF are so enthusiastic about this action guide. And I think now the time has come to really go into the detail. And I think now, Rolf, if I'm not mistaken, we can hand over to Gundula in order to have the hands-on training that is the main purpose of this workshop. Thank you.
Yes, 10:40. So we are in line with our program and nothing more to say. Gundula, the floor is yours. I will share the presentation of Gundula with all of you, and Gundula gives me signs when I go to the next slide. I need just 1 second or 2 seconds. Which one is it here? Oh, is this? Stop sharing. This one, huh? Voila.
Voila.
Gundula, please.
So welcome also from my side. I'm Gundula Wagner. I'm a chemical engineer and I'm from Germany. Try to speak English. Hopefully the most of you can get it, but a little bit easier. So I've been working in the wood-based industry about 25 years, and I'm mainly responsible for all working place measurements in our German group. For the others, they do that themselves. Besides formaldehyde, we also measure dust and PMDI and phenolic. Whatever you need on a working place has to be measured. In formaldehyde also measurements, we concern us with chimneys and emissions from our products, such as particle boards and MDF in test chambers. So I think I have a lot of experience around the formaldehyde measurements. So how do I come to speak here in that today, in that seminar? So with several days ago, I was part of the German Handlungsleitfaden, it's called. It's a German kind action guide. And I started with a social dialogue with the second and the third, and probably we see us in Lisbon and Porto some years ago. So if you stay there, you will find some slides again. So my task in this webinar is to present the action guide and more in detail and invite you to follow me along the guide. I will give you more informations around and try to illustrate it with some graphics to bring it nearby you. And after all theoretical thinking, I will show you some practical ideas how the action guide will work. So Rolf, give me the second slide. Could you switch to the second slide, Rolf? So here is the basis of our work. In 2016, SCOLE defined a limit value, and that just not has to be exceeded above 0.3 ppm over a period of 8 hours. They also define a short-term level. This short-term level was defined by 0.6 ppm, and SCOLE defines short-term very exactly. So short-term means that it's only 15 minutes above 0.3 ppm, and it has to be longer than 15 minutes. It has to be not more than 4 times a shift, and this has to be in stops about intervals of 1 hour. So that is exactly defined. To be over 0.3 ppm, 0.6 ppm is never be allowed. If you have areas with above 0.6 ppm, you have to wear masks and to have wear any personal protection. The average, no, the average of the day of the measuring day of 0.3 ppm by using short time exposure has not to be exceed. So you have in over total and overall to be below 0.3 ppm. Please do in account your national limits. I'm not aware of all national limits, and there's a so big number of countries related to us. So use your own limits. I'm going only to the European limits. I can go here. Okay, next slide, please. The idea of the action guide, Rolf and Chris will do it perfect, but I will do it with my own words again. Sorry for that, but I think it's too important. So why was the action guide developed in cooperation between the wood-based panel industry and the trade unions? What advantages we have and what improvements we strive for? So to have a complete halt free of formaldehyde in the wood-based panel industry, I'm sorry, it's impossible up to now. So to reach SCOLE every time in every place of the factory, it's a mission impossible. Based on personal measurements, we have carried out for a very long years, especially from people who are measured in inspection tours. We are faced, as Chris told you before, with very different values of formaldehyde. They could be extremely high, and you are shocked, and you have to want to have surely and fast improvements. But it could be also they're extremely low, and you don't understand why that's so low. There is formaldehyde around the plant, but it's extremely low, and you didn't understand again. So it's lost for the measurement people, and who's will get the results very difficult to interpret it. But we need to make improvements to be sure that our workers, our employees are very well. So by using the action guide, we get a plan which shows you where is the level below 0.3 ppm. We call that green areas, and surely you can go there without a mask. Otherwise, it's COVID, but for formaldehyde, you can have not to wear a mask. And you have defined areas which is red, and the emission of formaldehyde is extremely high. So this is a very transparent system, and it can be understood by everyone, employers, but also external companies such craftsmen and visitors are easy to instruct it, and they could see where the danger zones are. In the past, the production hall was contaminated with formaldehyde and it's a feeling of the people. It's all formaldehyde, it's all bad, and it's all worse. Now we have a color-zone system, and we can easily interpret that and say, no, that's not all bad. There's some areas that are really bad. You have to consider that. But on the other side, you have to see there's a lot of green areas you can work and move free without pain. So at the end, we also have to have an exposure, personal exposure limit. That is clear. And it's according to the CMD, the cancerogen mutagen directive, and we have to follow them and include in an exposure register the concentration of the personal measurement. More about this later. We are sure that the action guides will give us a practical system that works in reality and offers our help. At the end, we are able to derive specific improvements. I will hope you will come to the same conclusion as we at the end of my presentation or later on your own experience working on the action guide. Next slide. The action guide is not fundamentally new. It's based on different regulation. So where I'm from Germany, I put a lot of German regulations in, but you find your national regulation, I'm sure. But the European regulation I also faced here, it's just an idea that is a lot of regulations and norms has to be remarked. The EN 689 is the most important, I think, and hopefully all of you see that. This is a very new version in January 2020 published. So look at that, there's some differences there. So taking all to account brings the action guide in a system and to follow up. Next slide, please. Rolf, could you share the next? So in the action guide on chapter 4, and you get the English version mostly, and the others interpretation will follow. So in chapter 4, there's following steps defined. First of all, we have to look for the limits defined by Skoll. And I've shown you the Skoll paper before. It's 125, and it's interesting to read. Look in. So there we have to, afterwards, we have to define the activities and areas where formaldehyde is suspected. We have to define and carry out a measurement campaign of working place. We have to implement the action plan. We have to update the risk assessment. And last but important step, communicate the results to our employers. So how to do? Next slide, please. So I put here a picture of a virtual fabric of a wood-based panel industry. So in number 1, there is the spreading machine. And here you mix the particles with fresh resin and uncured resin. It goes to figure 2, 3, 4, and 5 to a forming line. There the particles are actually cooled and mixed with resin and then a little bit open. So it's suspected formaldehyde, but not as high as it comes in number 6, that's the press. The press is a big building, and we get a high temperature and high pressure there. So when you go to the start of the press and going to the end of the press, you get a rising temperature, and it's above 100 degrees. Water steam comes out, and with the water steam also formaldehyde comes out. So the formaldehyde emission will rising up from the front of the press to the end of the press. At the end of the press, a very hot board comes out, and the board is hot and give up formaldehyde. And it will cut in pieces in 7 or 8, and 8 is a so-called diagonal saw. And then the board goes down to number 9, the star cooler. Mostly the star cooler has a suction system, but in that build picture it's not be done. They go to a storage in 10, and afterwards the board has to be sanded in 11 and put to the final storage in 12. From this, it can be supplied to the customers, or it goes to a facing system for DBS, HBL, or electric system, or what else you want to do. These are very big machines. It's not on the area. It's also, you have different floors and steps you have to go mentioned. And by doing this, you have to look for the formaldehyde emission, so from the floor and also for different stages from that. So a working place, normal a worker has to be walking around this complete area through different zones with different formaldehyde emission levels. And it's not constantly repeating every shift. You know, they have sometimes to do more on that part and to do something more in the other part. Nevertheless, we want to be able to clearly identify, name, and mark the possible dangers in dealing with each other. This knowledge helps us to make improvements and then to stay healthy. This map is very, not practical. It's every plant has an individual plan. They are not one hall overall. This could be different halls and walls between. So you have to go to your own plan and look to your own map. Next slide, please. So we start by defining the areas and which are similar for each factory, but not the same, as I told you before. So let's take a look closer to the work that has to be done in these areas. About the work itself, there's only one expert, the employer himself. So start in this point, asking him what he's going through, where he feels bad, where he thinks there's problems. So let him be a part of the health environmental. And this is the key of success. If you're coming and discussing with him and to hear to him seriously, you will get the improvements, and he is the best man who helps you. To build a working place with the acceptance of the workers, that this is a very big point for us. So, and already now a very interesting point has taken now. So we have defined the areas, you have to talk with the people and get the real impression what happened there. In detail, you have to look if there are continuous or discontinuous situations. So a continuous situation could be that is every time the press is going, but a discontinuous situation could be at your open container. So it smells a little bit more formaldehyde, and probably you have to check in the gluing machine something else. And look around, which kind of technical solutions are there? Are there any suctions? Are extractor fans? And are they working well? It's not, it's from time to time, let me say, it's not working well, because sometimes it causes different problems with the production and they reduce the fans. And which kind of ventilation is there? Look around, is there open doors and windows? And it's not untypical that we have big gates in the halls, and they're mostly open or they're mostly closed. An open gate could be nice, and you think it's good because there a lot of fresh air comes in. But in our experience, we see sometimes that there's a too big cross ventilation by the gates, and the real ventilation of the press cannot work exactly. So be careful on that. And at last, how many workers are involved? Next step. Activity mostly defined by personal measurements and recalculated or recalculated by stationary measurements. So activities is more used than working places. Activities described what is he doing. So the activity could be producing a wood-based panel. So that is all covered. But we want to have improvements and want to go deeper and more in detail in it. So we need more precise description of some activities. So we could say we have a walk. We have a walk along the press. We have taken from the forming line or from the end of the press. We have to run the press in the control room. There's mostly no emission of formaldehyde. So we will have to look in detail what really has to be done. So I think we can go to the next slide. So if you are finished, the production could like this. So we have the forming line and the mud former, press inlet and press outlet, the diagonal saw and the star cooler in one area, the sawing cooling area and the sanding line. these areas are not divided by the same area. It's divided by different formaldehyde exposures was suspected. The goal is to define an expected level of formaldehyde. So the areas we define here are not the same and big one as the others. So we started with 7 different areas. Maybe again, the production goes over several halls, they have partitions by walls, and definitions of areas could look very different. Just a factory is built, it is as it is. So go in and do on your factory the work. It's a very important part here. Next step. Oh, nicht schnell. It's a coffee break now, so I hurry up because, sorry. Should we go on or make a coffee break earlier, Chris and Rolf? Chris, Rolf, we couldn't hear you.
The host unmuted us. Sorry, technical glitch. Thank you very much, Gundula, for your presentation. I found it clear. I don't see any questions in the chat other than a question in Polish, but unfortunately I don't speak Polish. I think advancing towards a coffee break is a good idea, but I'd like the opportunity, as we have time, to ask, is there anybody who has a question that has not yet been put in the chat? Are there any questions to Gundula on this first part? I think it's not the most detailed part, and I guess everybody more or less knows their own factory, but...
If we receive a question during the coffee break, we can also answer that or give it to Gundula directly after the coffee break before the next part of the presentation, I think. Okay.
So yes, I would suggest that we use this opportunity to take the coffee break, and we will start again with the second part of Gundula's presentation exactly at 11:15. Thank you all. Enjoy your coffee. Speak to you soon. So, welcome back to all of you after the coffee break. I hope you all enjoyed a coffee or a tea or whatever. Congratulations, Gundula, that we are 10 minutes ahead of schedule. I think that's great. I don't think you need to rush through your presentation, also because, of course, the translators need to be able to follow. So don't feel a need to rush. Before we hand over to you again, I have checked the chat function, and there are 2 items which I think are worth addressing very briefly. First of all, there are colleagues who are suggesting that if you're switching to low formaldehyde resins, that is one of the most cost-efficient ways of getting lower formaldehyde concentrations in the factory halls. I'm sure this is one of items that Gundula, when appropriate, will address in her presentation as one of the possible solutions. And then there are some people asking why we simply don't switch to other non-formaldehyde containing resins, as these are surely much less toxic. That's a topic which we could have a 2-day seminar on. We, in all honesty, have a document of about 40 pages looking at all possible alternative resins. Most of them simply don't work. or are not economic or pose all sorts of other problems. There is one alternative that we all know works perfectly well, and that's isocyanate, that's PMDI. But we hear many people saying that when you come to the work floor, that's actually an even bigger worker exposure problem than using formaldehyde. So switching to PMDI is not really the purpose of this this workshop. But if some people really insist, we can take this discussion again at the end of the seminar. So that those points are noted from the chat. Thank you for your contributions. And I think now we should give Gundula the floor again to continue with the truly tremendously interesting presentation. Gundula, please.
So thank you, coming back. Hope you enjoy your coffee. And remember what we have discussed before the coffee break, that we prepare areas and define areas in our production. We ask the people what they are doing and how they are working in the plant. So first slide, coffee break is over. Rolf, you have to go to the next slide.
Yes, but I have to explain there is a little problem I cannot solve. Sorry for that. But in this presentation, obviously there is something put in that after a while it blocks. So therefore I switch from time to time to the next slide or go back, so to not oversee this time period. But now it has blocked. I have to go out and come back soon.
Okay.
Is this one, no?
Mm-hmm.
Or this one?
No, the other one. Yeah.
Oh, no, that is the blocked one.
Okay, you can try the other one.
Next try. Sorry for that.
Yeah, we are all not profis in that case. So
Yes.
yes, that is the slide I need. Thank you. So a few words regarding personal measurements and stationary measurements. By personal measurements, the amount of formaldehyde was really measured by the employers when it goes to the production. So it's exactly what he was affected when he's done between the measuring. Every variation is recorded, and that in total. And you get a really picture of these 2 or 8 hours, how long you measure. When you have too high concentration of formaldehyde, it is often too difficult to decide what happened and why it's too high and in which place of area there is too much formaldehyde and he probably stayed too long. So troubleshooting is much more difficult. The idea behind the personal measurement is always that it's measuring really what is doing. And when he's walking around, he's really getting the emissions, what was affected. In all norms and regulations, it would be recommended. It seemed to be the best way to measure formaldehyde or whatever personal measurement is not only regarded to formaldehyde. So this white area I've shown you before, he has to walk around, and with their very, very different formaldehyde emission parts, it was extremely difficult to measure with a personal measurement. And what is typical? Is it a representative measurement above 2 hours or 8 hours? Measuring periods over 8 hours are really badly accepted. You put the pumps and the belt around the employee, and he mostly didn't like to wear it above a period of 8 hours. If you want to go to the toilet, he has to ask you to stop the pumps and to help him. If you want to have a break in the smoking area, you full record that, and you hardly see who is a smoker, and you see what emissions they will get. So mostly we do a 2 hours measurement, and it's possible and it's representative. And if you do 8 hour measurement, also 2 hour measurement, you can follow the people to understand what he's doing, like a shadow. it's also not so really liked by the person. If you walk 8 hours behind him, probably you get a friend for your life, but nevertheless, it's not so sufficient. So we try to make it a little bit better. We ask the people to write down and like formula what he has done in the 2 hours measuring, where he's going out, and then we receive the results. So at the end, we have very low results, and we are wondering if our measuring is working well, or we are wondering why it's so low. And he said, yeah, I'm completely have a big report to do, and I stand the whole time in the control room, and it's free from formaldehyde. Yeah, that's clear. Now you have measured the control room, but you get not an impression of the complete factory. On the other side, you told him to go out and you have to walk around the press, and he do that, but he has something to do outside. And he stays a complete time outside in the fresh air, and you get also extremely low results and no idea how your factory is running. On the other side, you get extreme high results. And you ask the worker behind or after you get the measurement, and you ask him why it's so high, what happened? And the worker says, yes, I was a big problem at the end of the press, but don't worry, I wear a mask the complete time. So there's not the real emissions I will get. So the control person has where the mask completes the 2 hours and you get an extreme high concentration, but it was not done by the persons. We hardly look for realistic and production representative conditions. We plan the measurement, we discuss it with the production people before, and we directly before when we explain the employee what to do. And it would be better by creating such a formula to write down and to have an idea what he has done, but it doesn't work so sufficient. It was more understandable, but at the end, we get only numbers and no idea where the big problems and where other improvements could be done. If we use stationary measurements, there's a typical measurement point in which is representative for an area and for the area where the employees were standing in. The workstation itself is quite stationary, and if some employees have not to move around very big sites, but sometimes they have to move. So if you have a much more stable system, a person who has not to walk around big areas, then the stationary measurement, the personal measurement will give the same results. There's no differences. But with the knowledge of the individual areas, we can identify the problems. We can see differences from one measurement campaign to the next one, and we can see where's the biggest amount of formaldehyde and where we have to work on. Both of measurements are right. Both measurements can control the limits. It's up to you which one you prefer. But to wear a mask over the whole shift, that is not the solution. When we start by doing this action guide, COVID-19 was not known. So today it's much more common and not so bad to wear a mask, but COVID-19 mask will not help. So for formaldehyde, it's only for COVID-19. If you wear a formaldehyde mask, in some cases they're also possible for COVID and formaldehyde. You have to ask your supplier of masks. So next slide. So we're in this third step of the action plan. So we have here now to define and carry out a measurement campaign at the working place. And when you come in, and first what you hear is, if you were yesterday here, it would be much more better. It was the worst yesterday, but today the air seems to be very clean. You're on the right day here. And last week it was much more worse, so you have to be there then. But you cannot plan a measuring campaign by waiting when it's mostly bad. And be aware, it's not so different as the people thinking about. So what we have seen is that is not so big variation at that point. Of course, it's a pity if you get the impression that you're now measuring a representative day. We usually recommend, or we do our measurements more in autumn and winter times and spring. We do not use the summer, because in summer much more doors and windows open, fine wind goes through the halls and reduce the formaldehyde. But we want to be safe also in winter times and when rainy days are. So we are mostly try to measure in not so warm months, and it's also it will work very well. And we also have to do several times measurements. And the first, if you have no experience, one measurement, a chemist say always it's no measurement. So take in account and to plan more than one measurement if you have no experience. If you do it several years ago and do it regularly, it's sufficient. And every measurement is a beginning and the beginning of learning. So then we prepare the pumps. We have to adjust it and we have to bring it on the places, and this takes time. And after adjusting the pumps along the press line, the filters start with the measuring. So again, here the sampling time you have to decide. You can also for a stationary measurement decide if you use it 15 minutes for short time exposure. You can use it 2 hours, representative a shift, or up to 8 hours for a complete shift. If you use a 15-minute short time exposure, probably you have to look for if its detection limit is not above, so that you register no formaldehyde. And the 15 minutes is also a very short time, and the variation of 15-minute parts could also be big. Up to 8 hours, it's the same. We have different products. We have speaking about resins before. In our production and in Germany especially, we have E.5, so a lower emitting board. And we see that also the resin has an influence clear. If you have smaller amount of formaldehyde in your production, you find lower emissions at the boards and at the plant. And after 8 hours, it's extremely long because products could change. So then we stand there and start the measuring on a typical high of a mouth and of the nose. So we put not the pump on the floor and extremely high. We do it where the people are working. So we use a stand or tripod to put the pump above. So we started. So it's important to take the data around. Believe me, it's more important over more years as you do it in the first time. So we record the date and time and the temperature and humidity exactly on that point where the pump is standing. We write down the weather conditions. Also in autumn, it could be Indian summer day and a beautiful day with slightly good temperatures and all doors and windows are open. And in summer times, it also be happen that there's a stormy day and extremely rainy day, so it could be closed. Look at what is general, the windows and ventilation on, and which product is manufactured. As I told you before, the resin is one key. If you have a no formaldehyde emitting resin, there is no formaldehyde in your production. If you have a low emitting resin, it's more or less lower. Is it a stable production, or is there some problems? It's always a stop and go, and there are a lot of hurry, people walking to the production. Record, if you make a personal measurement, the name of the worker. Afterwards, you get the results 1-2 weeks later. You can ask him what happened and how to understand it. And you have to put it in the exposition register from the CMD. If you make a personal measurement, you have to do also activity lists. As I told you before, give him a paper where you have to write down the different activities he has done and where he has done and how long he stayed there. So we say him not more or not less than 15 minutes period. Not every minute he has to write down, but in general what we found. So for many years, we are carried out and evaluate personal measurement. It is our way. do not misunderstand me here. The measurement itself, it's easy to judge and to decide if for that measurement of these 2 hours, if it's too high or too low formaldehyde emission the person will get. But for getting improvements to have a general overview, you need a lot of amounts of personal measurements, and mostly it helps at the end, not more. So you can almost believe that it will work. And if you have stationary measurement, it's more or less an overview. Next step. So how it looks like when we will measure. This is a belt typical for the personal measurement. There's mostly when you measure formaldehyde, you have to measure dust, wood dust especially. And we have a pump for dust and a pump for formaldehyde. And there's the belt where the employee put it over the shoulder and close it around his belly. The pump's mostly adjusted on his backward because he can move it more. And you see on the on the top of the belt, there is a dust inlet sampling on the left side. On the right side, you see the DMPH cartridge, which is used for formaldehyde. These pumps will be manufactured by Jillian, but it's not that we propose only Jillian pumps. It's not what we have, but there are different pumps available. So look what you are getting, what is could be done. There are all small pumps. You can put the time which is running of 2 hours or more and put in and can measure that. On the right side, you see typical weight for stationary measurement. There is the pipe not too long. There's only the pump and the small part. This pump was putting on a stand in front of and in the high nearby his mouth. And in the mouse and mouse, sorry. So next slide, please. Here I take some pictures for you where the typical measurement could be. So on the left side, you see a man with an orange t-shirt. He wears the belt and he has the pumps on his backward. And there's actually 2 pumps, once for formaldehyde and once for the dust. You see he's standing in a small room and there's a chair. I think it's a control room, and the control room he has not often to leave. So there's quite a very small area he has to work, and he's the same there's a tripod in front of him, and there is a pump you see on the tripod, and the pump adjusts with a filter system and the red sign goes down to that. There's a filter system for wood, and besides it's a little bit covered by the man, and there's a formaldehyde. And you get the impression that both of these measurements will get the same results. So sometimes a personal measurement is the same as a stationary result. On the right side, you see people who's also wearing a belt, but just only one, because there is in an impregnation area, and he has only a formaldehyde measurement, 1 pump, and here he can move around and do his work normally at that point. So next slide, please. So now we have taken our samples and we're coming back to our lab. What we are doing with the samples. Mostly, and the analytical method, which is mostly common and mostly used, the DNPH impregnated filter, we can buy and use it. Afterwards, if we come back with the DNPH filters, you have to analyze it with the called HPLC system in the lab. It's an expensive machine. Or you buy the filters and buy the analytical advice also, and you get the results. The measurement of DNPH is described in EN 16000 or in our first RefWood brochure 2010, 10 years ago. And it's also recommended in the school paper by the NIOSH method, NEOSH method 2016. It's all the same. It's based on DNPH, and it's working very well. We use the DMPH also for formaldehyde on the stack. We'll use DMPH also if it's an indoor air measurement. And also for chamber measurement, we can use the DMPH. It's at a wide range of concentration could measure by DMPH. The DMPH also measured not only formaldehyde, it's measured by all kind of small aldehydes you see around in the wood bench. Would you please unmute? Okay. And the next advantage is that the samples are stable for 14 days. So you can drive to a plant, take a measurement, and bring it to a lab, and it's stable anymore. Formaldehyde itself is not stable. If you make it in water, you have to recognize that the samples are not stable over a long time. And with the DMPH, the reactions formaldehyde is directly, and you can do that. You can impregnate your filters your own, but we will not do that anymore. It's a little bit complicated. It's easier to buy it, and it has to be stored in a refrigerator at around 5 degrees before measuring. And you start the measuring and taking the sample. If you put the samples back, you can buy an old HPLC system. If you have a chemical stuff like in our lab, you can do it yourself, but you can do it also with the advice of an external lab. There should be a lot of labs possible that can measure that. In the past, we also have some small hand direct measurement system based on an electrochemical sensor. Mostly they are built to measure exposure levels. That's 100 and 1,000 times higher concentration. It's not really designed for measurements at the working place. It seems too simple to go to the plant and have directly seenable system and you can read it. We try a lot of these machines and we do a lot of measurement, stationary common measurement with DMPH and parallel with that machines. We are not really lucky. There are some failures sometimes. They go to smaller and to higher concentration. It's not the same direction. Sometimes it goes up and can sometimes go up to now, but it's 5 years ago. We have not found a system we recommend here. And nowadays, there are laser assistant systems available, but we have never tested, and I think they are extremely expensive up to now. So up this point, we have to measure it with the DMPH cartridge with pumps and going back in the lab to analyze it. So next slide. So I take for this slide a little bit more. So we have activities, we have done the measurement, and we have get now the results. Now we have to put the results into account of our zoning system. So what kind of zones we defined? It's easy. At 0.3, if your limit, measured concentration is below 0.3 ppm, it's surely a green area. It defines that they are no affected by 8 hours shift over your whole working life. And it's clearly you can move there without a mask. But I think when I now speak about a mask, it's a formaldehyde mask. It's not a COVID-19 mask. So if your plant or factory say that you have required COVID-19 mask, you have to wear it. It's not the formaldehyde. So sorry, you have to difference. So you have not to have any personal protective. The wet area is also very clear. It's above 0.6 ppm, and you never have to be there without a personal protective equipment. A mask must be worn. Young people, visitors, pregnant women should not have access to this area. It is forbidden. Unfortunately, we in the wood-based panel cannot avoid this area for all. However, it looks like as a small area mostly, and we want to reduce them really, but look for solutions and to reduce it continuously and complete is something for the future. This area, the red areas, should clearly marked, and the employee should be trained about to know where it are and how to protect themselves. The green striped area should actually be, in the first idea, yellow, like a traffic system. But the traffic light system and the colors for that are used for another system. So we're not allowed to do that. But meanwhile, I think the green striped area, it's not easy to speak, but the green striped area describe a little bit precise what the situation is. This is the area of short time exposure. So if you go to such an area, it's above 0.3 ppm and below 0.6 ppm. And you're allowed to stay 15 minutes, 4 times a shift in 1 hour intervals. So this means in a transfer to a production and to a working life, if you move through such an area by just going through them, it's okay, you can do that. If you stay longer because you didn't know how long you have to stay in that area, you have to take a mask with you. Or even if you are sensitive people, you're allowed to do a mask. It's every time to allow to protect more than has to be done. So some managers of our plants did not like the green striped area. They decided to say, okay, green stripe is also red for us. But from the school, from the regulators, and from also from us, we say, okay, that's possible to mark these areas again, and you can go through and quickly and stay not a long time there. But if you stay, please take your mask with you. And if you go through such an area, take your mask with you, and probably you have to stay longer, and then you can put on the mask anymore. Okay, next slide, please. Now we come to the fourth step of 6. So it will be coming to an end. So we have activities and areas defined, we have measurement, and we have the measurements and the values and put it in zones, as I told you before. Then I inform the workers and the employees what has happened. We train on the action plan, we're showing the zones, we making a map, we put signs on the areas in the factories and say, okay, this is a red area, you have no access and it is forbidden for such people. Somewhere in our plans, the maps, if you go through a door to a production hall, the map is on the door. So if you go in the hall, you have the plan and them directly in front of you, and always in the control room. And at last, one measuring is no measuring. You have to install a next measurement campaign. We recommend a yearly assessment. It takes a lot of time, and so much changings are not in the plans. But if something should change, structurally change, or due to the advice of players and something else happened, and you have a new resin recipe or whatever, then measurement should be repeated anymore, faster. It's up to you how often you measure. But when you start to begin in a yearly, we really recommend it. So please check if the red zones every time has an unauthorized persons not allowed sign or red sign, whatever you use. Next slide. So our picture from the beginning of my presentation looks like this now. We have the forming line, the mat former, press inlet and outlet, diagonal saw and star cooler area, sawing and cooling area, and 7ing line. We have adjusted 4 areas which are green. You can move there and go and work there without a mask and any problems with formaldehyde emission. The press outlet is a deep red zone because there's a lot of water steam coming out and formaldehyde is out. And mostly I think it's in all our plants that the area at the end of the outlet mostly is red. It depends on your plant and how much rooms and halls you have. If the press inlet is also red or is a striped area, and also the diagonal, so on star cooler could be a striped area or extremely red area. And if you look here, then the press is a red area. It's nearby the sanding line. And if you have no wall between or big gates, mostly open, the high concentration of formaldehyde of the press could also affect it to the sanding line and make them not green. They could be striped area. So this is on that picture, you can easily see how important it is to look around which openings you have. If there are big wall openings to drive as a truck on a forklift between that, you have to record if that's open or not. And sometimes easily a sanding line comes from a green red striped or red area to a green area, while we define that this gate has to be closed as much as it can. And so the emission behind the wall could be green. The goal is for EPF to compare such areas across different plants in the future and to be able to derive something like good practice, like an idea. Or if a small company will start with that they have an idea where how high concentration of formaldehyde could be aware. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Fourth step, implementation of the action plan. Now you have measured the dam, but you have to do a personal measurement, or you have to calculate a personal measurement based on EN 689, sorry. Personal management cannot find to solve problems. We will not find the high emissions, but we have to put it on the CMD directive and to define it. So the stationary measurement could be calculated. And I will go very slowly to this example, hopefully that you all get that. So we have the areas. This is a little bit different to the areas I showed you before. The adhesives coating, the spreading area, the pre-press area, adhesives bonding press, diagonal saw, the cooling star, and the control room. At the adhesives coating, we find a concentration of 0.15 ppm. And this is a measuring point below 0.3 ppm, so it's a green zone. And the spreading area, we find a concentration of 0.3 ppm. So it could be a green area as you defined. It's happened a little bit how much measurements you have at the spreading area. Is there a lot of spreading areas, measurements and results below 0.3, and it's only this one 0.3, you can see, okay, it's nearly green. Is it more, if you have more results and they're around 0.3 ppm, please make a striped area. It's always the point of view to be sure that our employees get not so much formaldehyde emission. The pre-press with a concentration of 0.7 is clearly red, it's above. And you have a problem, and there nobody has to be without a mask. The adhesives bonding press is 0.2 and it's clearly green area. Diagonal saw with a measuring of 1 ppm, it's extremely high and you get also affected by the eyes, it's clearly red. The cooling star is 0.4 ppm, a clear green-red striped area. And the control room mostly get fresh air, there's air conditions and whatever, so they're extremely below 0.1 ppm. Mostly we every time measure the control room to be sure that the room where the employer stays most of the time will be clear and free from formaldehyde. So it's not necessary to do that every time. I think it's a kind of service and to show the employers that is really low. So we asked the person and employers how much time they spend during a normal shift. And this is a discussion is very fruitful. So he said to us, okay, adhesives coating, I just have to look for and once a shift and I need half an hour, so 0.5. By the spreading area, I have to go 2 times, but it's nearby, so it's not so much time. By the press area, I have to go in, yeah, but it's only 0.5. So active spawning, is the longest way. You stay about 2 hours in that area. Going down in the control room, you stay near the half of the shift of 4 hours. By calculating the concentration, dividing by the time, you get a calculation of formaldehyde for that, this part of formaldehyde emission in a normal situation. So by multiplying this, you can get the difference. If you go to the calculation, it's 0.01, 0.02, and the biggest one is 0.05. It's the area of green, and he spent 2 hours time there. And what we see also, we say that the prepress we set to 0 because the red areas are clearly defined. You have to wear a mask. And we say there, the people will get not influenced by formaldehyde because there's a mask and he will not breath formaldehyde. This is different seen in national regulations and always a big discussion. If you want to calculate it with, you can easily do it and make a not in 0 and make the real concentration in. But on the point of view from the workers and employees, they will not get the high concentration. They will wear a mask. So it's a theoretical value if you put it not to 0, but you calculate the formaldehyde itself. But it's up to you to do it. And at the end, you can summarize the result of the whole shift, and it's 0.09. It's this example. It's nearby indoor air concentration. So that could be very good for us. You could also quickly identify the most critical points and the important areas which has to be changed. So instead of one value of a personal measurement, normally these points are only done by one personal measurement. You get 7 different results and can variation and can look for that. I'm sure that is not perfect and it's not easy to do, and it could be a lot of discussion around that because someone say, okay, it's not in half an hour, I spent there 1 hour. So this is the case you have to go to the employers and discuss with them. We have also something surprising by doing this list. I say, okay, I have to go in the red area every time 1 hour. And we say, why you are working there? What are you doing there? And they say, okay, there's a box and I have to look for that and I have to make press a button. And we say, but it's nothing deal with the work there. No, but the board is every time there, and so I have to go in the red area. And we say, put the board outside. And we ask the electrician to put the board on the other side, and you have not to go. So by going to this list and to working on that list, you get much more information from the workers and bring up improvements. So that is the key of the action guide, and it's seemed to be extremely complicated, but if you do it several times, it's more and more easier. Next slide. On the first step, we have reassessments to do and to define. So if changes in the production as a new formaldehyde class in Germany, if there are a new ventilation and additional machines and whatever, you have to measure again. If the working places change, you have not only one control man. You will say one man has to control the first part of the press and the other has to the second part. You have different working places. You have to do the measuring again and look for that. As I told you before, we recommend a yearly reassessment by reporting the changes. So in Germany, we also say, okay, go to the area, do it not from your desk and from your office, go into the plant and have a look around if there has something changed or has nothing changed. And also, is it boring to measure nearly very, really low concentration of formaldehyde? So we say, okay, if you have 3 times in extreme low concentration, and it's defined in Germany, it's part 10 of the limit, so it means 0.03 ppm, and you have 3 times, you are not obliged to do any measurements anymore. But please go every time there and check if it's the same situation, if there's no machine additional brought in, or if the air ventilation is working very well, or something like that. So stay there and make every time a technical review. Okay, next slide. So we have discussed with the people before, we have done our measurements, and we get the results, make a zoning plan, and now we have to talk to our employers. We have to communicate the results. We have to write down the date and time, the concentration at the working place itself, the production conditions, and the weather and climatic conditions. For Germany, the results for the employers has to be stored about 14 years. So this means the whole working life has to be write down and to be stored. And on the other case, if you do 40 times the same measurement, you get a big experience of that. To get practice, Chris told you that we try and to collect all the data together, not exactly the measurement points, but how much areas, how much people are involved in that cases. And it's clear this is evaluated anonymously. We want to show that we come better and better over the years. The results then can be discussed in our working teams at EPF, where a lot of members I've seen in the chat and also as the participants, and say hello to all of my friends, looking for that. And we can have a constantly improvement. Okay, next slide. So after all the theoretical thinking, it seemed to be a lot of work. And to be honest, it is. And the first time you run through this action guide, it takes time. The first time you use everything, it takes more time when it's become more and more done. The work of defining zones and establishing workflows and calculation for the personal thresholds mostly has to be reviewed, but not to be clearly new have done. In German, we start the system very earlier, some years ago, and that's become for us for a routine in meanwhile. But yeah, it's not true. When we are preparing the measurement campaign, so we call for an appointment and coming in contact, what was the last year, what was the problems, are there problems anymore? Mostly our health engineers asked us to do several additional measurements because they have made improvements, because they have to measure different operations conditions, or they are not sure about a part back in the factory we have never measured before. And that's a good thing, because we are obliged to do, and it's a working life. We are working on the action guide, and it's coming more and more safely, and it's used. They asked us, that is unclear, but that the other side is there was something clear before, and there's something, only a small part is unclear. So if a measurement campaign, something comes out, something strange, only one area is too high, we are also called to come back. We change the color from green to red because the measuring where you say, okay, that's too high, and the engineers put on the map a right side until we find the problem, we solve the problem, we measure again, then it comes to green again. So it's not fixed over all the time, it could be changed. The system shows automatically is subject to a continuous improvement process. And it's deep in the meaning of CMD. They all want to have improvements. So I would like to show you what happened with the action guide in reality when it starts. And I want to show that it's good to invest the time. I put on typical reaction we get when we start with the system. So production manager says to us, okay, good idea. Now it's clear where the mission are, and I can introduce my employers. So be clear. The shift supervisor say, okay, we can work on that. But our main roads where we have to go from one part to part 20 times a day, this should not be a red area. Please bring it to a green area. Help us to be that and worry about that. The employer said us, okay, we see the complete plan and most of the areas are green. Only a few and small areas are red. That's fine. And it's clearly seen where I have to protect myself. I'm able to protect myself by understanding where high formaldehyde emissions could be. Our work council said to us, we support that. The employers are well informed and can get involved. You remember, one key is to discuss with the employers, ask them how they are feeling and what they're feeling over the time, where are the problems they see. The craftsmen, and that is a very important point with part of the action guide too, what happened when the production stopped and there's no formaldehyde anymore in it? I have to work on it with a mask. And we defined if you stop the press and there's no formaldehyde anymore, and you wait until a ventilation time, you can enter to that hall without a mask, and the red zone doesn't anymore exist. This is the same case if you change from the formaldehyde resin to an isocyanate resin, which has no formaldehyde, then there's sure there is no formaldehyde red zone because there is no formaldehyde anymore. One of our plants installed a light, and it's normally red when the press is running. When the press stops, a time is starting, and after 1.5 hours, the light returns to green, and the craftsman knows now we can enter to the press hall without a mask. This was also done by measurements by us. We periodical start pumps when the press stops, and we know exactly when the formaldehyde concentration is very low in this area. The craftsmen could walk in. It's important because sometimes they have big machines, they have to hard work and sweat a lot, and so they can have could press easily without a mask. Next. So I bring to you some, I call it success stories. So to show you how easy sometimes it is, and yeah, it works. So our production lab in one of our factory was above 0.3 ppm. The lab where always the people are working there should be above the limit. But we're looking for that, and why? And I printed a very simple map from production line. There's a wood panel press, and you see the small room below, it's called lab. And there was a door, and the door directly opened to a dark red zone at the end of the press. It was built because they were very quickly to get the samples there. And very standing around and thinking around, the production manager says, I closed that door. I wall them up, and we build a new door. The door opens now to the stairs, and from the stairs they enter to the press hall. And in the press hall, you can, when you enter to the red zones, you can wear a mask. Up to now, and several years ago, the lab is constantly below 0.3 ppm. They have no problems to work there. This solution is simple, efficient, and not expensive, but only possible by getting the zones and getting an understanding of the formaldehyde concentrations. Next story, please. Also from the lab side, the production saw where they prepare the samples standing directly beside the press. Perfect, but it's a dark red zone. So they're standing around and they're talking around and say, what can we do? Should we include air showers? Should we make wall around? But there's something problems with the fire protection. What could be done? So, and then employer said, there's a room nearby and there's only stored material. And if we find another place for that material, we can clean the room and put the saw in. And the saw was done, and they put it in an own room, and formaldehyde-free room. So this is simple solution, efficient solution, and not expensive. And it's only possible by getting zones and information and understanding of the formaldehyde concentration at that area. And it was done by the employees. A last and 3 success stories. I get a big amount of these stories, but for the presentation, we have to stop anymore. So there's a resin stage area in our plant, and there was 5 big resin containers. And this resin stage was a red area. But why? Once an hour, a resin was pumped from the storage to the production, and at this time, formaldehyde was emitted. The complete station area was covered with a high formaldehyde concentration, but only one of these 5 machines was responsible for that. So we put a plastic carton around it, and a very small suction unit takes the polluted air out. It's not a big van. Nobody has to work behind the curtain, and the complete station area becomes green. This, as you know, was a simple solution, an efficient solution, and not expensive. This is also a good example to show what we want to do. We want to have more and more green zones and reduce the red zones. The red zones, to be honest, would be more and more higher concentration, but the red zones are high concentrated formaldehyde. They come a little bit from red to dark red, probably, but you have to wear a mask. And the efficiency is that you have a lot of more green areas. But it is only possible by getting the zones and getting the understanding of formaldehyde emissions and formaldehyde concentrations again. But nevertheless, we also need sometimes technical solutions. And they asked me to share someone. And I decided to show you now the layered ventilation model. It's called like this. Here you see a schematic system of a hall. There are 2 formaldehyde emitting machines. It's small boxes, gray with round signs on the bottom between the left and right from the man. We get the fresh air outside and bring it with pipes down to nearby the floor. And the fresh air comes to the man directly and covered him with fresh air. It seems to be different and so simple, but it works. The area where the employees are will be free from formaldehyde, but by heat and rising up, concentration is under the roof. So there's a concentration higher, and but then nobody has to work. So the employees are flushed with fresh, clean air, and it's rising up. Next slide. This is the same situation, and the German DGUV, it's an it's company and authorization for health, has prepared such a model. Here, a fabric was built, and the green boxes behind the fog, you can see should be a press, a high temperature machine which emit formaldehyde and heat and probably water, steam, and anything else. On the right side, you see the blue pipe on the bottom, and it brings the fresh air in that area. And by coming down the fresh area to the floor, it was more and more polluted. It will not really be a fresh area when it comes to the person which is standing on the floor. And the whole factory was covered with a fog, if you want to see that. And there's also a mixing by going up the polluted air and coming down the fresh air, and it will be mixed. On the left side, you see different, the layered ventilation model. You see the white box on the left side. We put here the fresh air in, and the people will cover it with the fresh air. And only by going up, the cold air is laying down, go and heat it up and going up, and then you will be more and more polluted air. But the people themselves are covered with fresh air. There's also, I put the internet site, and there's a small video. It's on German, but if you put it also from the other side on, it's very impressive how it works. And you can see it. So they start with smoking and show you in a video how it works. Next slide. So here are some examples. The pipes going down on the columns or pillars, and so they are not disturbing the factory hall. A fog-like lifter, a fog-like truck could travel around. The air outlets, so it's called, usually built like these. At the end, we have more gray boxes at the end, are provided with many holes and slits and which comes the fresh air out. There is no extremely wind, and the person will not be affected by cold wind. It's usually not feel any drought. On the right side is the same picture. And here's a fogging machine installed to have a better visibility. It's normally not seenable, but to show you how this air outlet will happen and will work, you can see that here. We have installed some of that, and we have seen that this really helps us to have a stable, clear, free or nearly free situation in the production. This is a kind of sharing best practice as the EPF want to do more and more in future. So this is a solution to keep the air at the working places, and that costs some money, that's clear. So coming to the end of the action guide. We are sure that the limits for formaldehyde can control via the action guide. We define zones and creates with that a clear and understandable system, especially for employers, but also for external contractors, for visitors, for all. And this makes clearly seen that it's a simple system. By defining area, it leads to open and very fruitful discussion. No success story we have found without the discussions around and to make it visible. By understanding the emissions, improvements can be made. And I think it's important, we are credible. We are really convinced. Some areas in our production, I would be skeptical. It could be read for a longer time, but they are not an area of a full-time job. I hope now you will come to the same conclusions at the end of my presentation and after your own experience, that the action guide could be and is a way for our future. Thank you for listening and looking for your questions.
Thank you very much, Gundula, for this presentation. There was a tremendous amount of information in your presentation, so it's really impressive. Thank you very much. For me, one of the takeaways is that the title of the action guide is well chosen because it has the word action, and the action guide really means action, meaning it is used and it's going to be widely used, but also that it is going to mean improvement. Thank you for pointing out that that is one of the key elements that the Carcinogens and Mutagens Directive requires. It requires employers to show improvement. Through that, I think this action guide is an excellent contribution. We are fantastically in time. We have 15 minutes for questions, and participants have been active in the chat. I have noted 5 questions for you, Gundula. The first one is a very pragmatic question from one of our participants from Ukraine, who is asking what to do with the stairs to the control room. Is that a red zone? Or what's your answer to that question, Gundula?
It depends on, sometimes yes. Sometimes the stairs are to control room wet. Then we sometimes, that is also a simple solution, go to the stairs beside in the room. Sometimes crossing lines over the press also red, yeah.
Mhm. Okay, I think it depends where the stairs are located, how close they are to the press outlet and things like that. So I guess the answer is the same as what you explained in the presentation. You have to measure and then you will know the answer.
Yes.
There is another.
Probably stop, Chris. What the solution could be is also in the kind of ventilation model I say, bring fresh air to that area. That it could be. We have it in 2 plants. There we can see if there's fresh air shower, but not a shower. It takes to be a big mixture. So, but cover it from the bottom to the top, full covered with fresh air. It should not be a big one, but yeah, it could be helpful.
Mhm. Okay, thank you, Gundula. Then there is another question, whether there is a guideline or agreed activities or positions to measure among companies with a similar production. The person asking the question saying this would help to analyze the results and understand if the measured levels are similar to other companies. And one of our people in the chat has suggested that the EN 689 to which you referred would lead to the answer to that question. Can you maybe give some more information, Gundula?
Yeah, I hopefully understand. The EN 689 defined exposure scenarios with the same level. So if you can compare and the same, you can say, okay, that's the same area, and we put the results on the one area and compare to the other. I think it could work if you have a lab system control room that is clear. At so end of the press mostly is red. So you can also say, okay, by comparing this kind of areas and working places, it's allowed via EN 689 to do that. That's clear. Be careful. Probably make only one cross check and not everywhere. So something like that, something between. Hopefully that fits.
Let's hope we have another question and answer session later, so we can always come back to this topic. Rolf, you have a question also related to this, you say?
Yes, question from my side in this case. With the wood dust discussion, we discovered that in Europe we have a number of different devices and methods used. So here we were just referring to the European standard, to the EN. That is one aspect. The other aspect is the devices we use. And in your presentation, you said, Gundula, most common for the analytical method, and the analytical part is an own part of importance after the measurement. The DNPH system is used. Does it mean we also face, let's say, the problem or the fact that different type of analytical methods are used? And then the real question is, are they comparable?
Yeah. I think I know the discussion about wood dust, and there's it's a terrible discussion because when you discuss elements, you must trust your measurements. For format, I think that the case is not too big. If you stick to DNPH, if you go to other measurements with formaldehyde, typical for acetylacetone in water, whatever, you find similar results. We have tested that. But if you go to advices which should be directly reading, there could be cost problems. I'm not sure if that's really working, but it's not the same as for dust. In my thinking and my experience, formaldehyde could be measured. Yeah, it's simple. It's more complicated on stacks. Formaldehyde measuring in working places, it's not so big deal. And if you use the DMPH filter, sorry, it's every time, and I get more information. The DMPH filters is only possible to make DMPH measurements. If you have other filters, you can do that, but mostly in working places they use DMPH.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gunilla. Then another question that I have related to personal measurements is we got a question or a consideration that the person who is measuring should be the person who is listing the activities of the worker and not the worker himself. Can you comment on that?
It would be fine. But as I told you before, you have to walk behind him in like a shadow. And sometimes it's funny, you get a friend forever, sometimes not. Yeah, and if you walk one person behind, you have, you cannot do an additional measurements. Mostly in an area of a big plant, we have 40 measurement places. So our staff will go to different places. Meanwhile, start the pump there and going to dust dump there to improve and have not so much time waste. If you every time stick to them, it's a lot of time for the measuring people has to go with them. And we have several times, very bad experience with some guys who put formaldehyde active in the filter and also for dust. And it's easy to see that's so credible, so how much nobody can suck that. Then it's a case we do not trust the workers and go with them. But actually, if you do it more and more times and understand it, you easily can decide if there's something happened or not, and it's reliable or not. And mostly the worker are interested in the real emission. They will not, damage the measurement. It's more or less 10 years ago. We have a lot of trouble with that. Problem is if the measurement is too long and they go to smoking areas, then you have a big trouble because the formaldehyde emission is too high.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gundula. You clearly have a wealth of experience there. Another question from one of the participants was why you did not start your presentation with collective protection measures, which you have clearly put at the end, but not at the beginning. I guess I cannot guess the answer. Your answer is probably that, of course, you can start by investing fortunes in gigantic ventilation systems before you put in the measurement system, but you don't know what you're doing. So it's better probably to start first to map the plant before you make massive investments. What's your comment on this topic?
You're completely right. It also takes a lot of time. If you want to have such ventilation systems, you have to look for it, to get the money to install it. It's mostly a year. But if you do measurements and you have high concentration in a working place, which normally they want to have fast results. And I think it's not necessary to spend every time a lot of money for ventilation if you have smaller and simple systems like putting the saw out, changing the doors. We could save the money for better things. So ventilation is a very good thing and it works very well, but also not for all cases.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then we have another question from a participant from Germany who is asking why the maximum limit is now so substantially below 1 ppm that used to be the current maximum limit in Germany, and I'm asking whether that 1 ppm is still valid. I'm not an expert in German law, you certainly are, so can you answer that question?
I did not get the questions, I think, right.
I can answer.
The question is why the OEL the binding OEL that we are speaking about here, 0.3 ppm and 0.6 ppm, why this is so much lower than 1 ppm, which was the limit in Germany.
The limit in Germany a long time ago. I've never had the limit for 1 ppm, and I worked 25 years. I'm starting with 0.5 and it's going down to 0.3 ppm. It's listed in the Gestes or whatever.
And
Actually,
this,
yes, no
yeah.
Marktwert in Germany, but yeah, it's listed on the Gestes.
And what we have in the CMD, 0.3 and the short term of 0.6, that corresponds exactly to the current German MAC limits.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I think that is
And
clear.
maybe an additional information on that. So Chris was just saying the acronym CMD, the Carcinogens and Mutagens Directive on European level, is a minimum standard setting the 0.3 maximum limit value, and for short time exposure 0.6, and that is valid in all EU member states with an implementation phase which is ending next year. So we have it everywhere.
While we are discussing, we're getting two more points in the chat. One is a recommendation of one of our very active members within EPF, also in a related worker protection group that we have, our new fire and explosion safety task force, Mr. Rocha from Sonae Ruiko. He is suggesting that we should, to advance further in this project, to consider the development of a standardized communication package to clearly explain the concepts of the action guide in order to ensure that the messages that are given to all of the factories throughout Europe are one and the same. I think, Rolf, that's one of the takeaway messages for you and me. We know we have something to consider doing in the project in the next coming months. So thank you, José. That's an excellent suggestion. And then we also have a question whether what's the situation in non-EU countries like the United States and the United Kingdom. Because we're talking about one and the same chemicals, so should there be differences? To my basic knowledge, the limit in the United States is still higher than here in Europe. In UK, I was thinking it is currently higher, but they're probably going to align in the direction of what is in CMD. Gundula, do you have any information about these countries?
Only that the limits are higher. I don't know how that goes, but nevertheless, the principle of the action guide, it depends not exactly on the limit. The principle is to look where the high emissions and the low emissions, and you can transfer to every limit. So I don't know what UK, I think it's higher. It could be 1 or 2. I think it's extremely high. I cannot understand who one can work up to a ppm. The ice is really rising, and that causes a lot of problems. But yeah, I'm not convinced in detail. Sorry.
No problem, no problem. I think the limits in the law are higher in the UK. I guess in practice, the situation is probably relatively similar to in other countries. I'm sure the companies are doing their best. We have Mr. Grønnerud from Norway, who is explaining that the limit in Norway is apparently 0.5 ppm, so there are still differences. But you said clearly in your presentation, everybody should take into account of their local situation, but the action guide in itself is not tied to a limit. It's a management system, and I guess it's also the same if a specific company says, well, for us 0.6 is too high, we want to have it lower. They simply need to adapt their limits and to the color-based system. And if you change the limits, you can operate it again as a management tool. So
yes, and if I'm allowed to complement to that, I mean, for the carcinogens and mutagens directive, we have for a number of carcinogens, we have limit values, but the overall aim is to reduce the exposure as much as possible. So you don't say, oh, we have reached the limit value, now everything is fine. In a way, it is fine because you are below the limit value, but the overall aim is to go as low as possible. And I mean, our project is exactly going this way. We do not ask what is possible, not possible. We go with technical solutions, with organizational solutions, and in the very end also with personal protective equipment. But with these two main solutions or parts of solutions, we go as low as possible, independently on the country where we are or the limit value which exists. So, and I mean the similarity of the technology and the production line is a big advantage in this case because the technical solutions are comparable. Gundula was several times underlining that you can have separated areas by walls and so on, but in principle, the production line itself and the used technology, and therefore also the actual emissions, that is comparable and a bit the basis for the concept of our project, going as low as possible.
Yeah. And I think that's very well illustrated by the way Gundula explained how to try to reduce the red zone. The more you reduce the red zone, the more the red zone actually becomes an area in the factory. But generally speaking, nobody's working there except in very exceptional circumstances. So you still have an area that could potentially be of high exposure, but in practice it is not, because you can do a maximum to avoid that it is so. From that perspective, I think the action guide is really completely in line with the spirit of CMD. So I think we have exceeded our time now with just 5 minutes. So we have another question and answers session after the coffee break. So if there is no immediate burning question, I would suggest that we now take a 15 minutes coffee break and that we come back 10 minutes to 1 in order to have the session with the exchange of views and experiences. And I would encourage participants, if you have something to share or to ask, please use the time of the coffee break to put your questions or your experiences in the chat so that we can take them up immediately after the coffee break. Thank you again, Gundula, for this fantastic presentation. It was a big effort, and I saw messages in the chat from participants really appreciating it. So thank you so much, and let's come back at 10 minutes to 1 to continue with the question and answer session.
Okay, bye.
Very good, Chris.
I think fantastic.
Very good. Igor is also pleased.
Oh,
You moderate. Are you with us?
Yes.
Angleus, we have received a Spanish question.
I'll have a look and I'll put it in the chat in English.
Thanks a lot.
Give me a minute.
I did a Google Translate, but I'm not sure whether it's correct. Hello, welcome back to all of you. I have to say it's absolutely impressive. We still have 185 participants on online. So, and I see in the chat, Gundula, more and more messages appreciating your presentation. So I think this is really nice to see. There is, of course, one person asking the question that we should have answered already in the beginning of this workshop, whether we are going to distribute documents resulting from this workshop. Of course, that's absolutely the intention. So we will, of course, make the presentation by Gundula available. And of course, as you know, we have the English version of the updated action guide finalized, but we're in the process of finalizing 7 or 8 translations. So we have Spanish, which I think is final. We have Italian, we have German, which I think is, apart from some small editorial issues, final. We have French, and if I'm not mistaken, we also have Romanian, Bulgarian, and Dutch coming on. So these are all in the planning, and of course the project is going to continue. So yes, of course we will continue to give information. So I think that's an answer to that question. Of course, the project does not end here. There was one question in the chat in Spanish, of which I had of which Frank has been so kind to translate it in something that looks a bit more reasonable than what Google Translate made. Gundula, the question is, which are the best filters to be able to incorporate to the press extraction hoods and not to be eliminated outside? Can you, I mean, Google Translate asked me which are the best filters to be able to incorporate the press extraction hoods and not to be used outside. I don't know which of the translations is clear.
And I'm not sure if I understand the questions right, but if you put, if you when you filter systems, I think that there's suctions, you think, it go ahead to go outside. In regards to the atmosphere, I see it. They're different, and they're kind of washing with water systems, it's burning systems, biological filters, it's a lot of things. It depends on if you put some emissions together, whatever. This is a quite complicated answer, and it's not dealing with the information for working exposures. Then you have to ask suppliers of filters. A lot of, if you ask in the other part, which filters you have to wear in red zones, there are 2 different kinds, and both of them are, I would say, like fine. There's a half mask, you can big filters with mostly special active cool filters for formaldehyde. Please look to that filter, that they're really possible for formaldehyde. And there are also a system, in Porto, I think there's a picture from that. There is a pump on your belt, and fresh air goes with your protection head, what to say, around, and you have a covered visor before, and you permanently get fresh air. So they have no pressure problems by brushing, because there are no so big filters. You are covered with fresh air by the person itself. It's similar. It's not so cheap. It's a little bit expensive, but craftsmen like that very much, because there's a cooling system, and they can breathe. And when they have to wear heavy things, they can easy breathe. So that both possible. And take care to the filters and to the masks. I think For chemical and industry is more common. For our industry is not so common. The mask has to be cleaned regularly. The filters has to be changed, something like that. So all the people who has to have masks and to go into red zones has also been introduced how to use masks and what to do with masks and how to clean and whatever.
Thank you, Gundula. And yes, indeed, I guess part of the question was related to atmospheric emission, which would then lead us to the wood-based panel BREF and the BAT-IALs, which is a completely different story. So, right, then there was, yeah, Rolf?
Yes, we have received more a comment than a question from Helmut Schneidl from Kainel in Austria. And he was referring to the need he was referring to wood dust and the need to also include in our activities the producers of machinery. So, and I think that is a very important issue. So all technical solutions that refer to the machinery used or to exhaustion systems, there we need a communication with the manufacturers of this kind of machinery. They also need to know where are the weak points in the production line, where are the emissions and so on. We had on European level a big wood dust conference 1.5 years ago, and at this conference we discussed the same problem for wood dust and then handheld machinery and bigger stationary machinery. But the message was to improve machinery, the manufacturer needs to know about the problems in the practical use, and therefore the communication between manufacturer and user is of high importance. I think that's more a general point, and we should also keep that in mind for our ongoing activities in the framework of the project.
But Rolf, the action guide will fulfill this. It's one of an idea of the action guide. If we collect the data together, we have the pressure. If there are a lot of companies who will have a solution for a press outlet, whatever, so we can have a bigger pressure to machine producers to help us and to give them also reliable results.
Cooperation.
Then there is another question of this person in France who's saying in France we produce panels without formaldehyde. Is it the same in other countries? Of course, we know that wood itself emits formaldehyde, so I'm sure that person means no added formaldehyde. And I have a feeling that that person is probably referring to wet process fiber boards, hard boards and soft boards, which are produced without adding formaldehyde-based chemicals. But of course, we all know that the application field of these products are limited. Hard boards are by default very thin, and the soft boards are usually insulation boards. But if we look at the wide variety of applications of all wood-based panels, particle boards, and the FOSB, these materials are just niche materials. So I think it's a good question, but I think it illustrates that this cannot substitute all the other panel types. Rolf, you want to add something?
Yes, because it was popped up already in the first session of our seminar today. And I think we refer in our agreement to the stop principle, and Chris was also pointing out that that's quite clear. And also the companies, I think, who produce themselves formaldehyde, they are always looking to improve the, let's say, the composition and the quality and so on. We also know that there is research and tries to find alternatives which provides the same quality in the end. So that's an important process, and we are not against. Isocyanates was also mentioned, and isocyanates is a family of chemicals, and many of them are not less dangerous, but even more dangerous than formaldehyde for human beings. So it's a very difficult area. We follow that, But this project is not about talking about alternatives. This project has a focus on the existing production lines and the effective reduction. So at least from as trade unions, yes, we are of course for alternatives and substitutes, but that is another area of policy, let's say, and we support investment in this area. We support also research and practical experiences. But as said, this project considers the existing production lines and how to reduce successfully. So it was more a statement now, but I think it's it was needed in a way.
Thank you, Rolf, for the for the clarification. Another question for you, Gundula, relating to measurements. Are there automatical measurement systems available? Is that an option, or do we stick with the stationary and the personal measurements?
Yeah, automatically would be fine. Actually, I don't know a really good machine as it is. There are coming up some laser systems, but they were extremely expensive, around 40,000 euros. I think I've never tested this. That what I have tested is small handheld measuring systems. Yeah, I was not so happy about that. But they are working very well if you want to measure exposure levels. When it's explosion, that's 1,000 times higher sometimes, then it's working well. But we have a very small concentration of formaldehyde, and it's from the chemical and analytical point difficult to measure. If you go back there are machines, yes, but yeah, they're not transportable and something like that. It would be very fine to have something.
Yeah. It would be nice and an easy way to generate a lot of data without having to do a lot of work. Now, it's my understanding with this table that you explained in the presentation, which is on table 9 in page 9 of our action guide, with the areas and then the calculation system. I mean, do I understand it correctly that basically through this way of tracking what the workers are doing in actual practice, and then your knowledge, once you've put the system in place with your mapping, that you can very quickly calculate the real exposure of the workers to a pretty accurate way, and through that avoiding having to make actual personal measurements every day.
Yeah. That's the kind to have a knowledge, and if you understand the action guide right, they know how to protect, and they never will be above 0.6 ppm. And if they go to the areas as recommended, they have no limits above, so they have not to do a daily measurement.
So in practice, that means if supposing that workers and management are all very consistently using the system, and not like Belgian people, COVID-19, ignore the rules and just go out and party, and then part of them end up in hospital. But if everybody is really following the rules, wearing the protection system when they have to wear the mask, then basically the action guide is the perfect solution. If everything works well, it seems to be impossible to actually exceed the limits, the exposure.
Yeah, that's the idea behind.
Okay. Rolf, you had a question about which masks?
Done. That's answered. No, mask?
Which mask?
Ah.
Which masks are recommended in which area? There are half masks, there are ventilated masks. You also mentioned other masks, Gundula. Is there any guidance you can give?
Yeah, the discussion we also every time have is a half mask is good, but sometimes the formaldehyde emission is too high and your eyes begins to wincing and you cannot see clearly, and that's also a danger. So in some parts you have to a ventilated mask or complete covered mask with the eyes because you cannot see anymore. Yeah, you breathe no formaldehyde, but your eyes are rising and wincing, and so you have a problem.
So that would mean that half masks are, yes, appropriate in the green-red striped zone,
yeah,
where you are between the 0.3 and the 0.6, but in red zones where you can have concentrations so above the 0.6, maybe the half mask is not always appropriate.
It also depends on how long you stay in the red zone and what you have to do there. If you're a craftsman, have to do heavy things and he's breathing and sweating, so probably it's a ventilating mask. But half mask could also used in red zones, but it depends on what you're doing there, how long you stay there.
Okay. I don't see any other new questions in the chat. I see people are putting in links of their fantastic materials. I think that's great. Rolf, you have anything else to ask to Gundula? Or Gundula, do you have anything to add that you thought about during the coffee break, what you want to add to your presentation?
Actually not, but yeah, I'm impressed how much people hear to us and how much stay the whole time. So thank you for that.
I would have a last question. It's not a question, it's again more a consideration. I also come back to the table and like to express that the structure of this table with the zones, with the time periods, workers are there, and with the exposure, and then to weight it, that is an excellent way to get an idea about the situation. We nevertheless know that because of what you explained, different framework conditions, different atmospheric situations and so on, that can differ. That means before taking a conclusion, saying that is the standard, or we can expect that it is not above those limits, you need a number, of course, of measurements to repeat and to be sure that you are within a specific statistical span to say that that is valuable. I think that is the best way also to identify where we have to do additional protective measurements or protection or risk reduction measures of technical or organizational character. The only thing I warn a bit is that is the last line with the average, the 0.09. So it is absolutely correct to have it as a figure there, but it only says something with the whole table. If I say 0.09, that looks like there is nothing. But in the table, you see also 0.09 can mean that for an hour, a person is strongly above the limit value exposed, which is, of course, they're not acceptable. So that is the problem of averages. But the table itself, I think, in many ways, for the documentation of real exposure, for the risk, for the description of risk reduction measures, and for an estimation about expected exposure in several areas, it is a very, very good tool, I would say. So, and we have a lot of companies and colleagues from various countries taking part today, and I think not all of them were aware about the system. The question is, do we have additional guidance or advice people can get from our side to implement the action plan?
Is a question to me?
Yes, to you.
Okay. Actually, I would say, yeah, the presentation is most done, the action guide itself in all languages. And yeah, the title of the seminar is Train the Trainer. So you all can be trainer and put it in your country and to your companies anymore. So that's the idea of the social dialogue here. And I think, Rolf, you can more explain than me. That was what we want to do next year if COVID-19 let us do that.
I think the purpose now is to gather evidence, and for sure, through the implementation in more and more factories, I am sure that questions and ideas will come up. And within EPF, we are running a reporting exercise asking members about experiences and numbers and things like that. We have a specific form for that. But I think that is also the opportunity then for every company to bring your experiences, to bring your questions to us, and on the basis of that we can then see what additional things we can do. I think there is two more questions in the chat which we can deal very briefly. The first one is that in Germany there is quite a strict regulation, which surely you know much better than me, Gundula, that you need to track and document exactly what the workers are doing. And the question is whether there are meanwhile tracking systems with RFID or other technologies available that can help in this respect.
Yeah, this is kind of the extreme high concentration, high cost machines, but I've never tested it. So for FTIR, I think it's not possible. It's too low. Mostly there's a detection limit of 1 ppm. So that could be too low. There's special machines, they can go lower, but I've never tested it. Yeah, I can have no really answer. I'm looking for that, and if you supply me, I will test it.
Okay, and I guess it also then partly comes with the atmospheric emissions, where again you have these FTIR and other technologies. So and then there is another question, which is I think a question which we can pass on to one of the people on this call, Dr. Axel Knör, the chair of our EPF Industrial Emissions Directive. There is a proposal from Bulgaria doing a similar session as we are doing here, but on best available techniques for atmospheric emissions. So I think we have to consider that in another forum. So
Jakub for Polish.
Jakub.
I think we're coming at the end of our timing, so I guess rather than waiting for translation from Polish, maybe we need to move to the end. We still have 173 participants, so we are gradually losing the participants, which I think is normal. On our program, we have the point, what comes next? Rolf, you start or I start?
I can start.
Okay.
Yes. So what comes next? A lot of further activities, I hope, on company level and also on national level. You have to act on yourself. So we hope that this seminar gave some stimulus to improve on company level. We run our project another year, and within the framework of our project, this Train the Trainer seminar was sought to bring together some 25 or 30 people who are expected to act as intermediaries on national level then. So having an online conference, we succeeded in attracting 200 people, which is a real success. Nevertheless, we still have in our planning to run up to 7 seminars on regional or national level, maybe even on company level next year. So, and these seminars will be a bit repeat what we did today. So we will introduce into the agreement, into its political part and into its technical part, and we will support with those seminars the communication between social partner organizations on national level, and we will also support the communication between social partners on company level. So the target group of the regional seminars are the social partners from company level and social partner organizations, both. So we have in mind to run, for example, a regional seminar with the German-speaking area, meaning we can invite people from Austria, Germany, and Switzerland in once, maybe also from Alto Adige, and then a number of further seminars in different countries. So that is what we do. In parallel, we hope that we can create the links to the companies to collect the data and information about their activities, experiences, and as presented in Gundula's presentation, success stories and good examples and new ideas to for technical solutions or organizational solutions to reduce emissions or to protect people better. That is in brief what we do within the project, the European project on formaldehyde and the action guide. We have a steering group with people from both sides, and these steering group members are always open to get in touch. So you can contact us via the two organizations or via the steering group members so that we can also, let's say, improve the communication in our sector. That's as a first step from my side, and I can give back to you, Chris, to say a few more words on what comes next.
Thank you, Rolf. A little bit physical exercise to try and go towards the end of this workshop. So one thing I think is very important, and that is that we are not here to impose anything on you. We are absolutely delighted to have such a large audience here today. Rolf said we are aiming to have a German-speaking seminar, but really the outreach is to you. We have this project. We have a budget for running up to 7 seminars. Please, you are the experts. You're the people in the field. Let us know how you would like to have a seminar, in which country you would like to have it, in which company, what's your envisaged setup, and then we can see how to make this work. We are not here to impose, for instance, on Poland to run a seminar. That's not the purpose. The purpose is, for instance, for Spain to contact us and say, hey, we are interested, can we do something together? So I hope that this really inspires all of you to think about this idea. And then another point is, yes, COVID obliged us to make this seminar online. We are absolutely delighted with the success. We are considering, rules permitting, whether it would be useful in the first half of next year to do another train the trainer workshop, a physical one. Why? Because the physical one, first of all, has all the aspects that Rolf said, that you can really exchange a lot more experience, but also the people who originally designed the seminar, including Gundula and Hanno, who is unfortunately not with us, they were considering a number of practical workshops in which participants could then actually really implement the action guide during the workshop. In an online seminar, this was considered not feasible, but this is a possibility. So if you consider that we should do that, please let us know. If you say, no, this online one was more than enough, we don't need another one, let us know. Your feedback is of tremendous value for us. And then, of course, we want to communicate. I already explained that communication is very important to show how active we are here, in order to avoid that all sorts of people, and there is too many fundamentalists around the world wanting to go everything to zero. We need to be able to communicate how good we are. So we are running within EPF a reporting exercise, and of course, I'm sure Rolf is also working with his members. We have the ambition within this project to have a common communication platform, a common newsletter, in which we basically want to bring success stories to whatever is the audience. Our prime audience is, of course, the regulators, to show them that everything's under control and that they don't need to worry about formaldehyde. They can worry about asbestos. They can worry about coronavirus. They can worry about all sorts of interesting things, but they don't need to worry about formaldehyde. We have it perfectly under control. So any ideas, any inspirations, any suggestions of what you think we should have in our newsletter, any best experiences, are all very much welcome. And I think with that, the role of participation, yes, you all here are our partners. We need you. Without you, Rolf and I, we can have a lot of ideas. Oh, yes. Whether they will be realistic is another story. I think we explained about the translations of the action guide. We will, of course, make them electronic. This is the current world. But some people like Rolf and I have reached a certain age, and we think maybe also some printed copies could be useful. Now, you are the people who can tell us whether you need them or not. So if you say, I would like to have 10 brochures in English, let us know. If you want 50 in German, let us know, so that when in the next couple of weeks we are finalizing these translations, we can take your requests into account. And I think from my perspective, that leads me to saying thank you all very much. And I think, Rolf, you should also make some closing statements. And I don't know if our representatives of the EU Commission, who's still here, if Danny Schelling wants to say some words, of course, that's possible as well. Danny, I see you put on your video. Do you have some closing messages for us?
Well, a very short one. Thank you again for inviting me today. I found it very interesting, a bit too technical for me, because I'm not in the woodworking business as a practitioner, so to say. But I found it very interesting, very interactive as well. I mean, it's incredible how many participants you reach and how many participants you kept during the meeting. And I think once again that today has proven that what you have agreed upon at EU level will really have an impact on the floor. I mean, I think that is for me the conclusion that I've drawn from this very interesting seminar. So thank you, and good luck with the rest of the project.
Thank you very much, Danny. Much appreciated. I see there's one interesting question in the chat, how formaldehyde affects the coronavirus. I think if you put enough formaldehyde on the coronavirus, I'm sure it will die. So, but I'm not sure whether that's a good solution for occupational exposure at the workplace. Rolf, I think you should have the closing word.
Yeah, besides the question Chris has just answered in a very funny way, there pop up a few more questions about how we can run 7 seminars in 1 year and so on. We cannot answer all of them, but again, our offer to all of you. So if there is something special, if a question has not been answered, contact us, contact the steering group. So we need to stay in touch with you. And we also have the obligation to inform those who could not participate today. They also need to know about the offers from this project and the possibilities the project gives us. That is one thing. And then we have to communicate what we can support on national level. For example, with those seminars for the practitioners on local level. So that's all from my side. And I'm looking forward to continue the work in this project and with EPF, which turned out to be a very reliable and very productive and problem-solved oriented partner. And I hope we proved the same. So I also like to thank Chris for the preparation. Again, all the people who are not visible but supported us very much. And not at least Danny from the European Commission and all the interpreters They have really an own business with these online meetings and to prepare their own network and to use very or not that easy usable techniques and programs and so on. Thank you very much to all of you, and stay confident.
From my side, two additional informations to add. One is we have saved the chat, so if there are unanswered questions, we will look at them, and we have your contact details, so we will come back to you. If we don't come back to you and we didn't answer your question fully, please let us know. And then the last information is that we have had a number of volunteers who have been recording this session in the different languages, which we have the simultaneous translation. So if there is an interest, these files are huge. We are not going to be sending them to everybody, of course, but if you have an interest, I know that the big wizards behind the whole technology here, Anne and Frank, they will find ways of making those files available to you if there is an interest, if you want to just listen to them, if you want to share them with colleagues in your companies, in your countries, if you want to use them to run your own workshops together with us or independent from us. These are available, so please be aware of this. And from that perspective, I think also from me, on behalf of the EPF and on behalf of my colleague Clive Pinnington, our Chief Executive Officer, who could not be here with us today, thank you so much for participating. And you're all experts in health and safety. We are talking here about formaldehyde. The suggestion was done to do something on atmospheric emissions. And we also have our working group on fire and explosion safety, of which some of you here are already members. But please, if you're interested in that, the EPF member companies, don't hesitate to let us know, express us your interest, and we'll be glad to add you to that group. With that, thank you so much for your participation. I think this was a great workshop. I think we all learned a lot about this. Thank you, Rolf, and I wish you all a very nice day, and we look forward to getting your comments and your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all of you.
Bye to all of you. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.